Come on. It was the same design firm that did the Quick and the TLS-13 logo, so they're sort of starting to build a design language. Yeah.
Do they design logos for vulnerabilities as well?
No. Trying to tell them it's a growing market. It was actually really cool being in that design meetings. Where's Richard? Anyhow, he'll show up. Yeah, it was sort of interesting. Started, took all of the CA firms, looked at the color schemes, tried to find something that was different. Obviously, we want a different identity from, let's encrypt the original source. So yeah, help yourself to, a couple stickers from each.
But now you should have branded your sites.
Yeah, Yov only just got his stickers. As with the others, the SVG files and sticker mule. There you go. Yeah, they'll appreciate that. It'll be available so you can pull them down. It'll be open source sticker patterns.
It's nice. So last session, I mean, the IEEE would probably really like it. Leave them a sticker on the screen.
There we go. So, okay.
Okay, so let's begin. Thanks you, Yaron, for taking this picture. I just added the IETF103 part. Here's the note well. I'm sure you've seen this a couple of times. Hasn't changed much, hopefully, because I just copied the slide from IETF 101. Okay, agenda. So we have blue sheets going around. We have a note taker and JavaScribe. Do we?
Yeah, DKG is going to do JavaScribe, and the minutes are being taken in the Jabber room.
Okay, cool. And we've seen the note well. We're going to talk about document status, and then Yaron is going to talk about ACME Star. Alexi is going to talk about email certs, and John and who else? Chris are going to talk about telephony authority token.
Noted best-selling author, John Pearson.
Yeah. So any agenda bashing? No. Okay. So let's get on with it. So since the last meeting, we've had last call start in July 25th. Last call ended August 8th. Made some changes based on last call comments on August 10th. Then we had a bunch of comments and discussions from the ISG. Yeah, always ruin everything. So then had version 15, but Adam Roach's discuss was still unresolved, and there was a lot of discussion on the list about allowing or disallowing gets as opposed to authenticated posts. Finally, October 12th, we had version 16 with no more gets, among other changes. And finally, on November 2nd, the document is approved, but there needs to be a revision for some minor comments. So this is where I put the slide with the ticker tape and champagne bottle graphic, but we've already done that about a year and a half ago, so not jinxing it again. Okay, we've got ACME IP publication requested.
Quick point on that last slide.
You are?
Richard Barnes. I'm still waiting for my co-author to take a look at the PR that we have open with these minor revisions. So while you're sitting in the room here, you might pull up the GitHub repo and take a quick glance at that and see if there's anything you want to scream about while we're still here. I'll probably merge it late tonight or tomorrow.
Cool. So we have 3 documents in late stages. ACME IP and ACME TLSA LPN are publication requested, and ACME CAA is gone through AD evaluation, revised AD needed. So,
and Jayshaw just posted his revision, so that should be good to go now, I think.
Okay, I pulled the statuses out of the data tracker yesterday.
I'm sorry, you're correct. Yes, not Jayshaw.
Rich, we can't hear you.
Okay, good, because I said the wrong name. just before, 24 hours before the IETF started, we got a revision addressing Ecker's issue. And so that's moving through the ISJ again.
Okay, any comments about any of these three? Because we're not going to have any presentations about them. Good. So now time for presentation. And first up is Yaron. Yeah, where did my thing go? Oops.
All right, so I'm Yaron Scheffer. I will be talking about, thank you. I will be talking about two documents. One is the working group document, ACME Star, and the other is ACME Star delegation. So starting with the working group document. Oh, so, yes, no.
Computer's here.
Yeah. Yeah. So as we all know, the base ACME document moved to use post as get for everything. However, this doesn't work in delegation use cases, and therefore we added treatment of HTTP GET in this document. This is the main change that happened in 04. We made some terminology changes. This is one example, some smaller changes as well. We clarified the certificate validity. So in the case when you have a certificate that's good for, say, 3 days, you want to have it available on the server 50%, so a day and a half before before the previous one expires, and you want the new certificate to actually be valid as soon as it's available. So we clarified all of this. And we also talk about revocation and made that explicitly not supported for this type of certificates. Next. So to drill down into the way we're proposing to use GET, the server adds an attribute. So we added an attribute that the server needs to include in the metadata object, in the directory object. And then it's on a per order basis. So client asks for the specific order, so for the series of certificates, for an order to be available via GET, and assuming the server is okay with it, this attribute will also be set on the order object, and of course, the client will be able to use it through GET. Other than that, fetching the certificate is unchanged from what we have in version 03 of the draft. Next. No. Okay, so the status of the document is it was actually passed working group last call, and so on the verge of being publication requested, but we made quite a few changes, starting with the GET thing, but also including other changes. So it's basically for the working group to decide what we want to do now. We could rerun it through working group last call, or we could move it forward. Cheers.
So anyone in the room want to express an opinion?
I mean, it seems like there have been some substantive changes since the last call, so I wouldn't mind another working group last call before we send this on.
Okay. All right, we'll start one. 2 weeks.
Pretty much now, and
Yeah.
we'll do this second working group last call thing that silence is interpreted as agreement.
And yeah, we'll post that to the list. And the expectation that, since I think the bulk of the changes were caused by the ACME changes, it should be fairly straightforward. I'd like to encourage everyone to please read the document.
We will agree and exchange to read it.
Okay. All right, so we'll start a 2-week last call and post it on the list and then move forward again for publication.
All right. And next slide, please. So moving to the other document. Thomas.
And we need Thomas was that, and we need a shepherd as well.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, good point. Is anybody interested in being a document shepherd? This is sort of writing up the history of the document within the working group and is presented with the publication request. It's an easy way.
To get brownie points.
You get brownie points, karma points. If not, it falls to the working group chairs, but it's, if you're thinking about getting more involved and you want to sit up front at some point, it's a good way to get experience as to what's involved. So if you are interested, and again, we'll post this on the list too, if you are interested, let the chairs know. Otherwise, we'll flip a coin and I think it's my turn. Okay.
All right. So speaking of document history, ACME STAR delegation went through SecDispatch. SecDispatch said, yeah, this has to do with ACME, send it to ACME. Folks at ACME weren't so happy with it because it was a sort of a very small REST API and not an ACME protocol per se. So now it is. We actually rewrote the document as an ACME protocol profile with some differences, of course, which I will list later. And this is now published as a draft Sheffer and so on. Next. So what this is doing is we have two ACME protocol state machines, one between the name delegation client and the identifier owner, and another between the identifier owner, which is a classical ACME client, and the CA server. There's essentially no change. There is no change to the protocol between the IDO and the CA. But the protocol between the NDC and the IDO is basically a subset of the ACME protocol. And the way this works is the name delegation client creates an order request to the IDO, identifies itself or authenticates itself as an account owner on the IDO, and now the IDO acts both as an ACME server and an ACME client. Sort of a proxy, but not exactly, and the document goes into the specifics of what is proxied and what is not. Unlike regular ACME, the CSR gets sent immediately, and there are no authorizations for the client. And then the protocol between the IDO and the CA server is just normal ACME or ACME STAR. Next. So like I said, the NDC has an account on the IDO where the IDO acts as an ACME server. And this is how the NDC authenticates and signs its requests through the account object. There are no authorizations. It's a simpler state machine. And one more thing, in order, and you can move to the next slide, in order to simplify the management of DNS delegations that normally come in this situation, we include CNAME information into the identifier object, as you can see at the bottom of this slide. We add an attribute delegated and a CNAME listing the actual name that should go into a CNAME resource record that will be created, assuming the IDO has an automated way to provision this record into its DNS zone.
Richard Barnes. Just quick clarifying questions. So this is what is sent by the NDC to the IDO in its order request.
Yes.
To clarify, to kind of provide the identifier owner instructions for how it should fulfill a DNS challenge.
Correct. Not the DNS challenge. It's simple bookkeeping, DNS bookkeeping, to be performed by the NDC. Thomas, would you like to add something?
So what I was understanding this is to say is like, if you delegate the value DNS name, if you provision a CNAME to the CNAME DNS name, then I'll handle the challenge fulfillment for you. Is that what this is meant to say?
No.
No. The DNS challenge is run on the value, and that's it. And the CNAME is just a hint for the middle guy,
IDO.
the IDO to actually fill the zone. So to create the mapping between value and CNAME.
John Peterson, but the CNAME is basically what you're getting a cert for too, though, right?
No, it is not.
Okay. The cert is value. Okay. Yep. If that's true, then I'm cool. Okay.
Are you? And by the way, this whole thing is optional. But it simplifies, sort of synchronizes the DNS work that you normally do with the certificate registration.
So when the CA, it's on the ultimate end of this, goes to validate the ndc.dno.example name, is the idea that there will be a CNAME provision for that will cause the validation request to go? No.
No.
So what CNAME is provisioned as a result of this?
Yeah, but what direction is it?
Yeah. Points from NDC to ndc.dno?
Points from DNO to NDC.
Right. Yeah. So this is like when I want my CDN to get a cert for me.
Yes.
It's a similar use case, so I would assume so.
Yeah, the comment was from John Peterson. He said, so this is like Lark. So I think bumping up a level, I obviously need to read the drafts and really understand this, but I'm worried that we're conflating two functions here. One is setting up a delegation, and the other is issuing certificates that leverage that delegation to do validation. So maybe use, okay. I'm not totally convinced that those are worth kind of slamming together in this way. I'll take a look at the drafts and send some comments.
Next, please. The document is sort of on the fence regarding whether this is restricted to short-term certificates or applicable to your normal long-term certificates. And this is something that I would like to open with the group here. We could focus on short-term certificates unless people feel that delegation is actually useful for the normal certificate case. Opinions, ideas?
Richard Barnes, I mean, this seems most obviously useful for the short-term auto-renewed case, but I don't see a necessary reason to conjoin them like that. Does that make sense? So it's like, I don't see any reason to say you shouldn't do this for long-term stuff. It's just that there's not much reason to. In that
Okay,
case.
at least right now, it's possible to have them orthogonal.
If somebody finds a solution wherein this is Chris Clements, whereas they're using them for long-term certs and it makes life easier, I think more power to them. We should encourage these sorts of solutions.
Okay.
Yoavnir with no hats. And what if we don't find such a use case before the thing is published? I mean, do we publish hoping that when such a use case comes, it's really appropriate? Because this has a danger that at some point we would want to do delegation and say, oh, but for long-term certificates, this one is not appropriate because right now we don't have any use cases like that.
This is Daniel Kahn-Gilmore. I'm asking if you are going to restrict it to star, how are you going to restrict it to star? What is what specific cut line would you use to make that restriction? Is it based on expiry date requested or other mechanisms?
Well, the document could simply say that if you, as an IDO, receive this request, you must include the star-related attributes, and that would restrict it.
Yeah, Tim Hellbeek. My personal opinion is that just makes things more complicated. I think if delegation depends on something like the certificate lifetime, which is completely independent of what you're actually doing, then everybody has to keep in their mental models and all their analysis that delegation is for short-term certificates, and that's a special case that doesn't exist for long-term certificates. I'm sensitive to the idea of, are we building something that people will use or not? But I think there are lots of cases where you want to do delegation, and I don't think it has anything to do with the lifetime of the certificate. It's more useful in short-lived certificates, but I think it's generally useful, and I don't see any good reason to restrict it.
All right, thank you.
Seems like we'll have to take that to the list like everything else, but without a sense of the room, unless we want to take a sense of the room.
It's not a working group document yet.
Yeah, we have to.
Yeah, well, you still came to us for advice.
Yes.
Or a request. Are you requesting that we adopt this?
That's on the next slide.
So do you want to take a hum if we think that for this document, whether it is or is not a working document, it should be restricted to star? Yeah, why not?
I think it's kind of early before anybody has read the document.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Point taken.
You'll put it in the draft, right? Open issue.
Right.
Okay. So we're humbly asking the working group to adopt the document.
Richard Barnes, and I'm going to harp on this CNAME thing a little bit more. Because if you've delegated a CNAME, if the identifier owner has delegated a CNAME to the end server, effectively, what do we call it, the NDC, then the NDC can just run ACME on its own. It effectively owns that identifier now. It doesn't need to go through the identifier owner at all. Right, because the DNS just points to it. It can't do the DNS challenge, but it can do the HTTP challenge. Well, maybe it can do the DNS challenge, but it can do at least some of the domain name challenges just by having the CNAME pointing to it. In fact, there's a lot of deployed art here.
It has a very specific CNAME.
Sorry. Yeah. We're not trying to emphasize. I was asking Richard, like, how does base ACME actually work in this if it encounters a CNAME when it's resolving the challenge? It just works? So it would just trickle through anyway?
DNS does.
Okay.
Yeah.
It follows the CNAME. Yeah, my understanding is. Yeah, my understanding is that there's CDNs today that are doing this to do ACME issuance. So
Yes,
in
there
the case,
It still doesn't have the account key. Would that be a problem, or?
well, no, there's no inherent binding between account keys and domain names except what you prove by doing validation. So if no one's ever claimed abc.ndc.dno.example, and some random account key that happens to be the NDC shows up and validates that it can control that domain, then the CA will accept that he has control of that domain. There's no need to route the ACME request through the domain owner because the CA doesn't know who the domain owner is. It's trying to find out. So yeah, I think this CNAME stuff here is pretty confusing. Other than that, the document seems sane.
So
Okay.
I'll just remind folks that the document, if we adopt it, it doesn't have to come in the door with every issue resolved. That's all.
Yeah, I think this is more of a scoping question of whether the CNAME establishment between a domain owner and the ultimate serving entity is germane for this. And I'm not really seeing that as a necessary case here, although I'm happy to discuss.
John Peterson again. So I think the difference would be if you only have an account with the intermediate, right, that is acting as a back-to-back ACME client server for you here, and you don't have an account with the end server, which is the use case you had up originally, right? Like then you can kind of see the sense of it, right? So if your account is only with the DNO, is that right? The domain name owner, or is it IDO in this case?
IDO.
Yeah, IDO, okay. If your account is only with the IDO that's running that, then yeah, then you wouldn't be able to prove it to the main server unless you established some independent account with it. So at least that's different.
Yeah.
It's not very different, but it's at least, if the argument is that this doesn't actually accomplish anything, it at least accomplishes that, right? It establishes that like back-to-back thing.
Yeah, you would have to have, to some degree, I find that not so convincing because ACME accounts are cheap. Like you just spin them up on demand. Except where a CA is imposing conditions on things. So for example, one thing that's been discussed off and on, that Let's Encrypt discussed for a while, was like, you might say lock a domain to a particular account. So if a domain has been validated by a given account, you might refuse to validate it to other accounts in the future. I'm not aware of anyone doing that in practice with ACME, at least. I don't know, other CAs might be doing something like that. And if you're doing that, there would be value to routing through the guy who'd validate it. So maybe there's something that reasonable there. Yeah, maybe.
I want to make sure that topic was done before I just have a quick question, actually, because on the STIR side of things, we have cases for delegated certificates in a very similar model. Is there open, are you locking this to DNS type, or are you open to having other identifier types in the delegated model?
So first of all, once this is a working group document, this would be a working group decision, but I don't see any reason to lock it specifically to DNS.
Okay. Yeah, I figured so, but I thought I'd bring it up just to make people aware of it.
Sanjay Mishra, just a quick question here. So the CNAME, the string that you're using here, so the NDC is asking IDO that this is the CNAME I want you to use when you are delegating to me. Is that what that field is indicating?
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Anyone else? Okay, so how many have read this draft? Oh, a few more than I thought. Well, yeah, still not that I'm going to hum on adoption, but how about we hum on the question of whether the working group would like to do work in this area, in this domain, on this subject, and after that we do the regular call for adoption, where people would be expected to read before they give their opinion. So how many think that this subject is something that the working group should do work on? Hum now. How many think that this is something that the group should not do work on? Okay, that's pretty clear. So we'll wait a week because people don't really do any IETF work on the week following IETF because we're late for stuff at work. So in about a week or two, we'll issue a call for adoption and see where that takes us. Okay, thank you, Ron.
Thank you. Sense of the room, just so we can say if you're opposed on the mailing list.
But
No?
sense of room of this document?
Yeah.
From the 5 people who have read it?
Okay.
Yeah.
Good point.
Okay, so next up is Alexei.
Thank you. I did my slides in expectation that people read some version of the document. How many people have read email TLS document? All right. Okay, so basic idea is to issue certificates through ACME to email services like IMAP or SMTP submission, etc. So the main changes in the latest version is basically reshuffling of moving some attributes from Jose header, I believe, to the payload. I think I talked to Richard Barnes. He said it's the more natural thing for it to be. Corrected some typos, and I would also added SMTP extension registration, which is a requirement for SMTP extensions. So one remaining open issue is whether it's useful to have a single request that asks for single certificate for multiple related services. I'm sort of on the fence on this. If people have a preference one way or another, please let me know. But I'm tempted just to do it, change the list of ports and services to be an array, and then you can handle this case.
Paul Hoffman, I understand the first question. I don't understand the proposed change you were going to make. Which way would it move it towards?
So at the moment, service is a single service name,
Yep.
and port is a single port.
Yep.
So if you want to issue, say, IMAP port 143 and IMAP-S port 993, you need to do 2 requests.
So if what I want is the answer for the first question to be, yes, it's okay to have the same, I want you to have these arrays, correct?
Yeah, so
Okay,
in
so-
this case, you will have
So you are changing
IMAP,
it to something that I want.
Yeah, yes.
Okay, great. Because I do think that it is just fine to have certificates allowed to cover multiple. I see no reason not to.
Yeah, I think the typical use case is a lot of mail products come as a set of related services.
Mhm.
So it's easier to have a single certificate that covers IMAP, POP, and like.
Yep, exactly right.
So then you will ask for several and can be done in one go.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay.
To clarify, are we talking about 1 array or 2 arrays?
One array to port for service. It's going to be services, 1 array, and 1 array for ports, and they need to match 1 to 1.
I would say, okay.
If people prefer to have a single attribute which have an array of pairs, I can do that, but I don't think it's.
So Richard Barnes, now I'm confused because this document is talking about authenticating DNS identifiers. And so the thing that would go into the certificate that's being issued is a DNS name. So the certificate would just be about the name, not the ports.
Well,
so
in
I could,
theory, you can issue SRV certificate with SRV name.
okay, but
subject of name.
that's not specified in here, is it?
It is mentioned in the document, I think.
Oh, okay.
I mean, yes, in the most common case, you are going just to have
I see.
one DNS name covering all services, but
I see. So in that case, yeah, this might need a little bit of refactoring. I think it might make sense to treat SRV ID as a different identifier type that would then get its own challenges. Basically the same challenges you've got here, but then you'd map the identifier type to, you would say, I want to be able to say host name and port in the identifier in the cert, and then you'd validate possession of that host name and port. Maybe that's
TKG at the mic. So I want to agree with you, Richard. So it seems like if the ultimate thing that's being issued is just based on name, then including this mechanism is too much complexity. If the thing that you're trying to issue embeds this stuff, then obviously you need it, right? But I also don't know who's actually validating SRV name inserts at all. Like, so there's like several steps of the chain that seem to be missing to justify the inclusion of this additional complexity if the name would have worked anyway. Right. Or is what this is supposed to be doing giving the issuing CA different instructions on how to find the responder?
yes, depending on the challenge, there is for DNS there will be slightly different DNS name to check the challenge for. It will be service specific. And if you are using in protocol challenge, obviously SMTP is SMTP specific, POP3 specific.
So again, if the cert that's being issued isn't specific to the service and the port, then this opens up some flavor of attack on the names that are going to be validated by by existing clients on other protocols, right?
Right. This tries, what currently people sometimes do, they start HTTP server on a host running email system and just get the regular certificate, and it covers as a side effect.
I do that today, right?
Right. This is trying to be tighter than that.
Well, it's tighter than that, except that it's tighter than that for issuance, but looser than that for use, unless you're issuing an SRV name cert.
Right.
So Paul Hoffman again. This isn't clear in the current draft because I thought that this was all about putting in like attributes in the cert. So the fact that you're, so I'm just saying, whatever you do here, making array or whatever, you should also be adding a paragraph or two, maybe with examples.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess we've got a couple layers of indirection here. We've got the name that appears in the cert, the thing you validate, the identifier you validate in ACME, and the challenge you use to validate it. I think what I'm least clear on is the mapping between the thing that's in the cert and the thing that you want to validate. For instance, it may be possible that CAs are willing to put SRV names in certs for arbitrary ports if you validated control of the domain name, right? Because you've proven that you own the domain, so have all the ports you want. In that case, you could just use DNS identifiers and you just have a different way to validate it. Is that the operating concept here?
I'm hoping that CAs will issue SRVs by validating specific port, but the DNS name is a fallback, just to be practical.
Okay, so if you want the CA to validate the specific port, then I think you do want like an SRV name identifier instead of using the DNS identifier, because that way you can have challenges that map to that specific port.
Yes.
I have no idea what Tim, do you guys do email certs at all? You can comment on the state of the art here?
Tim Hallbeek, that one not so much. I thought you were going to ask me to comment on the state of the art in SRV names, which is an easier question. They've been discussed, but basically nobody's doing it. The other interesting comment that I wanted to make while I happen to be up here is the assumption that all services on a particular domain are controlled by the same people and even operated by the same server is no longer true. And so that's something we probably want to be a little bit careful about. And I would like to live in the world that you live in, where if you have a certificate for a particular, you want to live in as well. Let me put it that way. If you have a certificate for a particular service, it was validated against that particular service, the server and port.
Right.
But it's going to take a while to get there.
Well, yeah, obviously there is a catch-22 problem here. So I'm developing server software that use these or client software that can validate these, like including a survey name. But obviously I need CAs to start issuing this, yes. Okay. Okay, and so I think, speaking of previous discussion, I think, Richard, you're going to send some suggestion about challenges, and yeah, okay, sounds good. So other than this proposed change to array or, array of pairs or something, I think this would be ready for last call.
Okay.
Obviously, the discussion we had here, I don't know, it might be sort of like working group last call discussion, or maybe we'll find out that there is more discussion to have on the mailing list, so we'll see.
Yeah, so I'd like to see another draft come out with, based on Richard's text, the text you got to write, and then we can then issue last call and really encourage people of the working group to read this. These are very short. It's a short document.
Yeah, this one is relatively
TLS
simple.
1.3 is done, folks. You got reading time available now.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I talked about this. I can also ask about one SMTP and IMAP mailing list who is interested in implementing some of it. SMIME. This had a little bit more work recently, but it's sort of far away to being completed. I actually got a couple of reviewers on the mailing list commenting on the proposal. Basically, this is issuing end user certificates for SMIME, and the way it works that there is a new challenge. Half of the token arrives over HTTPS, the other half arrives over email in a special message, and then the client calculates, signature and sends the response in another message. So most of the work here was in recent versions was done on specific messages, and there are some examples how this might look like. Again, here, if you have a particular email expertise, feel free to comment. I'm sort of talking a lot to myself, trying to convince. On one hand, it's would be nice to use the most simple implementations, so they don't have to understand a lot about mine, and just maybe you parse text plain parts. But in reality, a lot of clients are using and generating more complicated messages like multi-part alternative, where they send both text plain and HTML, or maybe there is a need to send in attachments, which can be processed by external programs. So if you have comments.
I apologize, I didn't read the draft, but are you expecting users to respond to the challenge manually, or are you expecting explicit support in clients?
Either. So the idea is that the message is simple enough that it can be handled automatically by email client, because there are special ways of recognizing that this is a special challenge. It also would be possible for the user to cut and paste token into an external app, generate a value, paste it into response, send it back.
Wonderful. I will read it.
Right.
This is DKG channeling for Thomas Peterson. He says, on validation, DMARC should be used as it defines domains name, domains use of either DKIM or SPF, right?
Yes. So yeah, one of the open issues is, well, 20 years ago, emails were quite insecure. These days, you expect a bit more validation, whether it's, SMIME signatures or DKIM, DMARC, all of this stuff. So I think the document should be more specific on the recommendations. Again, if people have an opinion, let me know. So yeah, SMIME signature obviously only works for the challenge from the CA to the client, because we are trying to get a SMIME certificate from the client to, it's only work in one direction. But DMARC DKIM can be used on both messages, challenge and response.
So besides your own, anyone else in the room gonna promise to read this doc? Thank you, Daniel and Tim. Okay.
I have a question. I won't go to the mic because I'll trip over the wires here. Is there any provision in the draft about people reading their email on different clients, on multiple clients? If you get the certificate into one client and it's not present on the other, you're going to get encrypted mail and not be able to read it.
Don't think there is a case of encrypted mail. It might be SMIME signed, which should be, if your client cannot verify signatures, that again.
Well, a lot of email clients, once they've seen a signature from you, they're going to allow people to encrypt, allow the user to encrypt the mail that's going to you.
Yeah, I suppose that's yet another.
More convenient when everybody had one client to read the mail.
One client and one mode of actually implementing all of these choices. Yes. Good question. I don't know. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Which leaves us with John and/or Chris. Who's on first?
I think we're at two-man this. The last presentation of the IETF, right?
Right. Don't take more than an hour.
This is your final presentation. We will be doing this two-headed giant style. Come on up, man. Get in the view.
Use your left hand because this is really short range.
This is really short range. Use my left hand. Okay. Yeah, so we're talking about authority tokens and TN auth list. We don't have much to say though, so you guys can pretty much check out this video. In case you've forgotten what the authority token is for, this came out of the work that we're doing in STIR, where we decided there should be a way to do challenges with some kind of a generic authority that has some out-of-band means of determining which kind of clients would have the authority to claim certificates for certain kinds of identifiers. Telephone numbers are original use case, though the way that the TN auth list is defined in this is broader than just telephone numbers. It applies to some telephone network specific identifiers like service provider codes that we've defined over in STIR. And so we put together this document that tried to just make this completely generic. To make it so anybody who wants to prop up an authority token service could do so. You'll be able to create a JOT and, basically use this to prove to the ultimate authority token that that you deserve to be able to get a certificate for a particular identifier. We created a typing mechanism for that, and that is really short range. Mm-hmm. This is what a challenge for this might look like for this this particular type of authority token. Here we have the token type defined as ATC, which is the version we use for JOTs. And that's all that's in the first one of these drafts. And that draft has not changed a terrific amount in this particular revision. But we have a registry for those types so if people want to define other types for it, they could use things other than JOT. That's all in there. Wow, that is amazingly short range. So then we did go ahead and define a way to do this that is specific to the telephone number option for this, and Chris can talk probably a bit about that and what we've done with it. But at the end of the day, really where we are with this is for this revision, we just did some editorial fixes. We updated the examples so that they actually conform with the latest version of ACME and the changes that were made in that. We put in some errata that had come through from ADIS. I don't know if you want to talk a bit about what changes you made on that, but.
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to mention there was over in the IPNNI, that's the service provider specific industry group that's using STIR. We've put that into our documents, shaken and reviewed it over there. So, we're sort of hot to trot on this.
Yeah, and we've been kind of slow rolling it a little bit until we made sure that the people over at ADIS were comfortable with this, precisely because we're trying to get buy-in from a pretty large service provider community that is not necessarily familiar with the typical vocabulary of how we would do things for approving things for DNS names and so on. So it's important that we keep that on board. In terms of what we still have to do, I don't think this is ready for last call or review probably at this stage. We do want to patch in, and we're just going to shamelessly steal this from what the people are doing in ADIS, the RESTful interface that they're actually using for token acquisitions. We don't have anything for that now in the main authority token draft. Our inclination on that, though, is not to actually make it like this is the mandatory way to do it, but instead to have that be an example. And if people want to use something other than this RESTful interface, that'll be fine, but we will at least define one way of doing this in the base specification for authority token. We have a ton of housekeeping still to do in both drafts, though, like adding the sectons to the TN off list draft. So I think probably if we do one more rev of this, it should be ready for review and hopefully for last call. So there's really not much to it, I guess. So this is not a particularly complex, I think, mechanism. Anything more you want to add? Or?
No, I think that's good.
Is there anything that people would like to discuss about this document at this time? It's a really fascinating document. And this is like all we have left. I think we get to go home if the answer is no.
So obvious downer question, how many have read the draft?
Nice, good.
And the Shake and Stir passport folks have all been involved with this, right? Okay.
Right, yeah. So that's kind of when we talk about review over at ADIS. So that's where they do Shaken. And it's, this is a pretty crucial use case for that, in the sense of there's actually like major agencies and governments and carriers and stuff that are spinning up the process that'll actually create the CAs for this. And so it's not an insubstantial use case.
Right. So this is Rich Snowhat's clarifying question. This is related to what the chairman of the FCC just asked those providers to provide, right?
It is, yeah. Chairman Pai sent a very polite note to the CEOs of a number of carriers, including my good friend Chris, asking them to please explain how soon they were going to do all the stir shaken stuff. And he has a pretty aggressive timeline in mind for that. I think this doesn't necessarily have to be fully baked before we can start doing things with stir and shaken. And there are already various kinds of trials and test cases in labs and so on that have been proven out for it. But I think the long-term operational plan of how we get this deployed in the telephone network is going to require these certificate authorities. They are defined by the call authentication trust anchor process that we all went through with the FCC and so on. So yeah, this has happened.
Maybe it probably makes sense to say that, the authority we're talking about in the authority token is being set up as we speak. So.
Any other comments, questions?
You get to go home if not.
Promises to read the document?
So like I said, I would honestly, before I wanted to point reviewer eyes at it, I think we should bake a little more into it, but then we'd probably like to get a couple people to do it.
So has everyone signed the blue sheets? You haven't? We've got one right here at the front.
Yeah. All right, make sure you sign the blue sheets, and whoever's got the handful of stickers that are left, please bring them up too. And so I handed them out with the blue sheets. Thank you all, and we did good so far.